Senator Dan Biss, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
I'm glad to be here, Terry.
You are a candidate, Democratic candidate for governor, and I think you surprised some people just recently. A poll came out that put you in the second spot and not that far behind Mr. Pritzker,
Right.
even though he has been carpet bombing the state with ads for some time. Before we get into some of the issues, let's just introduce you to people who aren't aware of you. Who is Dan Biss? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, actually. My dad was from DeKalb. My mom was an immigrant from Israel. And they both wound up first as students and then on the faculty at the music school at Indiana University, and I grew up there. Lived kind of a normal life, went to public elementary and high school, and fell in love with math, of all things. I went off to study math, got a PhD eventually, and came to Illinois to start teaching at the University of Chicago.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Harvard for college.
Both all the way through?
Then I did my graduate work at MIT.
Too bad you couldn't get into a good school then.
Hey, I lucked out. I lucked out. I was fortunate.
Did you teach? What did you do after you got your PhD in math?
I taught at the University of Chicago. I was there for 6 years. And I'll be honest with you, Terry, I thought that was going to be my life's work, but I saw a country spinning out of control, and I saw people coming together to do something about it, and I felt like I had to be a part of that. Started knocking on doors and going block to block, neighborhood to neighborhood, and I fell in love with this idea that if you built people into real movements, you could make political change, and that set me down the path that eventually led me to run for the legislature, and that's why I'm here today.
You started in the House. What year were you first elected to the House?
I was elected in 2010 and served one term, and I've been in the Senate since January of 2013.
And to run for any office, but especially governor in a large state like this, as I say, is a grueling experience. We're here at about 8:30 in the morning on budget day. Last night you were in Belleville and Waterloo, which are roughly an hour and a half south of Springfield, and you're back up here, if not fresh, but here in the morning.
Hope I'm fresh enough.
So what you have to have some passion to make yourself do that, to go through this. It's so such an arduous task to run for office like this. So what are you passionate about? What would Governor Biss, how would you change Illinois if you had your way?
Well, let me start by saying, Terry, that obviously it's hard work, but I have nothing to complain about. I get to meet all kinds of people and see things and learn things I never would have had the chance to learn before, and it's a real privilege. The only challenge for me is the time away from my family. I'm married to love of my life, Karen, who's a history teacher. We've got 2 kids, Elliot and Theodore, who are in 2nd and 4th grade in our neighborhood public school, and it's a lot of time away from them, and that's the only part of this thing that's really hard for me. But what I'll say is this: we live an ordinary middle-class life. We pay more than 10% of our income in property taxes. We send our kids to public school. We try to figure out how, in God's name, we're going to one day help them afford college, and we have several times in our life made career transitions based in part on whether our kids would or would not be able to access health care. And what I see is an Illinois that's just not on the side of middle-class families like mine any longer. An Illinois where if you're born with a lot of wealth or with connections to political power, you'll be fine. And the rest of us are just left rolling the dice. And I'm running because it's time to build an Illinois that works for ordinary families, an Illinois that lifts people up everywhere in the state, not just in a few neighborhoods or a few zip codes or a few people.
What you hear, I would expect, and what I hear is one of the things is that property taxes are crushing middle-class families.
Yeah.
Do you have any plan to address that issue?
I sure do. And again, it's probably no surprise that as the only person running for governor whose family actually has trouble paying their own property tax bill, I'm someone who understands what families across Illinois are experiencing. And listen, the main reason our property taxes are so high is because the state fails to fund schools properly, and the state fails to fund schools properly because we've got a tax code that's written for the 1970s, not 2018. If we were to repeal the flat tax provision of the Constitution so we could finally ask the wealthy to pay their share to fund our schools, we could bring property taxes down, and that would be beneficial both to middle-class homeowners like myself and to the working poor who are also being crushed by the current system.
So the Illinois has a flat tax, and you'd have to pass a constitutional amendment to have it be a progressive income tax where the rich pay more,
Yeah.
as we have at the federal level. what would the upper income bracket be under a progressive tax that you would support?
Well, let me start by saying it's not just like we have on the federal level, it's like we have in almost all states. There's only 4 states in the union, counting Illinois, whose constitution says that you have to have a flat income tax. None of our neighboring states have that in their constitutions. And if you go to Wisconsin or Iowa or Missouri, the rich pay more, and the middle class and the poor pay less. I think that we should start to pattern a modern income tax code after what's worked in some of the neighboring states and look at some of the ways that they ask the wealthy to pay more and find that they can use that revenue to bring in adequate dollars to fund schools across their states, not just in a few zip codes. You have to sit down and work out the details, but those neighboring states provide a really useful blueprint.
I asked Mr. Deibler, who's running also, he gave me a number. Do you have a number? I mean, you're a math guy. What, if people are going to support you, they'd want to have some inclination of, are you talking about a top bracket of 5.5%, 6%, 10%? I mean,
I think what you need to do is understand that budget's got not just one number, but tons of numbers in it, and to lay out, hey, here's what the tax bracket for a particular person is, but I won't say a word about how much money we need for schools or Medicaid. That's a step backwards, not a step forward.
Have you run the numbers to say if we had a progressive tax, this is how much more money, because that's what you're saying.
Well, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. If you were to take Wisconsin's income tax code and put it here in Illinois, that would be $10 billion of additional revenue a year. And people in Wisconsin pay much lower property taxes, partially as a result. So you don't need to look at states that are far afield or all that different from Illinois. If you look at neighboring states, there's some models that can be used, and then you need to put that model through the principles. And the principles and values I bring are, hey, listen, in Illinois, it's a hard place to be a middle-class homeowner. It's a hard place to be a poor person trying to make ends meet, but it's a great place to be a billionaire. So let us ask the very wealthiest to pay more so we can give a break to middle-class families and to the poor.
Because time's always, I want to just try to move through. So would you be in favor of what would be a tax swap, the term, so that we raise income taxes, but then we can lower property taxes? We're funding the schools at the local level, which presents a problem. Now, maybe the refunding formula that Senator Menard actually was the primary author of, maybe that'll help address it. But if you're in Illinois, one of the problems, if you're born in the wrong zip code, you might just be in a school that's going to be grossly underfunded.
That's right.
If you're born in the right zip code, you're going to have a school that's grossly overfunded. I mean, so some people say we need a more general tax so that it doesn't matter what zip code you're in. We can, maybe whether it's a sales tax, maybe whether it's an income tax. Would you be, as a general approach, in favor of that in an effort to get the property taxes down and then equalize the distribution of resources for education or other issues?
Yeah, here's what Illinois gets wrong. Our school funding is overwhelmingly from property tax. That's not how it works in most states. So yes, job number one is to shift away from that system, where instead of relying on property taxes for an overwhelming percentage of school dollars, we should bring property taxes down, tax the wealthy appropriately so the state has the money to fund schools properly like our neighboring states do. And what you've done then is 2 things. Number one, and crucial, you've made our school funding more fair so that people have adequately funded schools in every zip code, not just 1 or 2. But additionally, you've created a more fair, more modern, and more economically logical tax system, which is important for economic justice and for economic growth. You can do both of those things if you get this right.
How do you describe, there's conservative, moderate, liberal, as far as a general, how would you describe yourself on the spectrum of governmental approach?
Oh, I'm a progressive, and I'm also someone who's been in the legislature for 7 years, who's passed almost 90 bills into law, who knows how to work with everyone. I know how to work with Democrats and Republicans, representatives and senators. I know how to work with progressive Democrats from my wing of the party or Democrats from the more centrist machine wing of the party as well. And what I think we need is someone with those rock-solid progressive values and a knowledge of how to work with everybody to move that progressive agenda forward.
One of the knocks in general, I'm generalizing, so not about you, but in general, that I hear from the business community would say that people in government are too often there to want to regulate us, want to tax us, tell us what to do, how to do it. I think you're for the $15 minimum wage, that they're going to mandate our costs go up by how much we got to pay our workers. but they don't do anything to help improve the business climate so that we can grow jobs in Illinois, so that we can attract businesses to Illinois. Is that a legitimate beef, or what would you do to help grow the business climate in Illinois?
That's a great question, and I think that there's a lot that we have to do to create a level playing field for the kind of business climate that we want to have. And part of that is about public resources. That means having an educated workforce. That means having access to higher education, so a higher percentage of our workforce has that kind of post-secondary certification. That means investment in infrastructure, which is, in some sense, the most important foundation and backbone of the type of economy that we've historically had in Illinois for centuries. It also means level playing field when it comes to regulations and taxes. One thing that we have in Illinois is a system that's written by large corporations for large corporations. And so that means that if you're a small business or a startup or you're trying to grow your small business, the tax system is rigged against you. The regulatory system is rigged against you to make sure that the bigger guys don't have competition. I think we need to set up a fair level playing field, and what that guarantees is that over time Illinois becomes the kind of place with a thriving, churning, vibrant economy where someone with a good idea can start a business and see it grow and be successful. And that's the kind of economy we want.
When we look at what a governor does, one can put in policies that you want to have, but part of it is also a job of being an administrator.
You bet.
Even before Governor Rauner was elected, Julie Hymos, who then ran Children and Family Services, and it's a $1 billion plus program, but she was complaining that our computer systems are 30 years old and they can't even find people to write the code for it anymore. There's any number of things, I think, like that, that Illinois' our system of government is outdated in many ways, either technologically or maybe the laws. Have you looked at that? I mean, having been as long as you've been in the legislature, which is not really all that long, frankly, but to the extent that you have been, are there changes like that from an administrative standpoint that you say, here's what we could do that would really improve how government functions for the state of Illinois?
Oh, you bet. What we have unfortunately seen happen too often is that investing in the right kind of functioning state government doesn't win anybody a lot of political points. And so the legislature has kind of hollowed out the operation of state government, not invested in the kind of IT that would create for an efficient, modern state government, not invested in, here's a politically unpopular word, not invested in the state bureaucracy to make sure we have enough people, enough caseworkers to have an effectively run government. We need better integration across state government with shared services and the demolition of all kinds of walls and borders that exist between agencies and between divisions so we can actually have cooperation and streamlining. These things will never get anybody a headline on the front page of the newspaper, but they're what we need if we want to have a state government that actually serves the citizens comprehensively and efficiently.
This is a big question I probably should have brought up earlier with the time growing short, but one of the issues that many Republicans were opposed to Governor Rauner now is because not only he signed HB 40, which allowed for taxpayer funding of abortions, but also SB 31, which was the so-called sanctuary state. You and all the other Democrats running for governor would say that you're supporting that sanctuary state thing. People would say, well, wait a minute, the federal government, the U.S. Constitution trumps the Illinois Constitution. The federal government, wouldn't you as a governor have to work with the federal government? And how can you say we're going to select which laws we're going to follow and which only the laws that we agree with? Isn't the sanctuary state law or issue in opposition to U.S. law?
No, and in fact, I was a proud co-sponsor of the Trust Act of Senate Bill 31. Been working on that for years, actually, even before Donald Trump became president. What that law says is that we as a state and our local communities shouldn't use our own resources to work on federal policies that make our own communities less safe. We need local law enforcement to be working on local public safety problems, not working on deportations, not working with President Trump and ICE to make communities here in Illinois more fearful. And that's a basic, important principle of federalism. We should not feel bound by federal law to have our own state resources being used in ways that are not in keeping with the values of the people of Illinois. That's number one. And number two, this is about making Illinois a stronger state. We do better economically. We do better in terms of having a culturally vibrant and vital community when people from across the world want to come to Illinois. If we can establish Illinois as a truly welcoming state that's a beacon for people around the globe, we'll see our population grow. We'll see our economic activity pick up. We'll see everybody here have better opportunity. This is an opportunity for the state of Illinois to not just stand up to the Trump administration, which is important, but make ourselves the kind of extraordinarily economically vibrant place that will improve everybody's quality of life.
One last thing, and another big question, big issue, is the pension cost. Would you support a constitutional amendment that would allow for pensions to be reduced? And if not, how do we operate a budget when we have, looking at the ramp up numbers, the pension costs are going to increasingly be taking a larger part of monies that would otherwise go to education and other functions?
No, we need to institutionalize a system where we actually make responsible pension payments every year, not just politically convenient payments or payments set by politicians, but payments actually calculated by actuaries. And if you look at pension systems like the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund that have that mechanism in place, they wind up in fine fiscal shape, and those that don't. And we need to find constitutional solutions, and there are constitutional approaches that are fair and legal and reasonable.
What would be an example of that?
Oh, for example, we've got 628 pension systems in Illinois. Almost every community has one for police officers, one for firefighters, and that's inefficient and allows politically connected vendors to go in there and pull out all kinds of resources. If you consolidate those, you don't touch anyone's benefit, you keep the promise, you don't touch the constitutional protection, and yet you save money. We ought to find constitutional, legal, fair approaches, and we ought to fund the pension system properly every single year, and we need to fix our tax system so that the act of funding the system properly is actually affordable and consistent with the 2018 economy.
Last question. We are going to hear the governor's budget address when this airs around the state next week. It'll be known. We don't know yet what the governor would say. But would a Governor Biss, as you well know, there's been a lot of smoke and mirrors over the years where we really haven't had balanced budgets.
Right.
Would you, are you enough of a fiscal conservative that you would insist on real numbers, being a math guy, for a balanced budget, or not?
To me, that's just being fiscally responsible. So the answer, of course, is I believe in balanced budgets, and not just one-year balanced budgets. Don't balance the budget like an arithmetic problem in a spreadsheet. Balance it in a sustainable way so that we can have confidence in next year's budget and the year after and the year after that. As we sit here this morning, we're going to later on hear Governor Rauner's last ever budget address. Hopefully it'll be his first ever balanced budget address, but let me tell you, Terry, I'm not holding my breath.
Senator Dan Biss, we appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Hey, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks.